The biting wind whipped through the narrow streets of Athens, carrying with it the stench of refuse and the distant murmur of the agora. For Lysander, the chill was a constant companion, a stark reminder of the crumbling walls of his family home and the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. He was barely 12, yet his hands were already calloused from endless days toiling in his father's pottery workshop, shaping clay into vessels that rarely sold for enough to keep the embers burning through the night. Lysander often dreamed of a different life, one where the scent of baking bread replaced the acrid smell of clay dust, and the only calluses on his hands were from holding scrolls, not tools. His father, a once proud artisan, had fallen victim to a cruel twist of fate. A rival potter, wealthier and more ruthless, had undercut their prices, slowly strangling their livelihood. Now, dead collectors loomed like vultures, their shadows stretching long over their meager existence. Lysander heard the hushed, desperate conversations between his parents, the rising panic in his mother's voice as she spoke of losing their home, their very last shred of dignity. He saw the defeat etched on his father's face, the once vibrant eyes now dulled by despair. Lysander's heart ached with a helplessness that transcended his young age. He was too small to fight the men who threatened them, too young to conjure coin from thin air. The only thing he possessed was his youth, his unblemished face, and the quiet dignity his mother had instilled in him. He knew, deep down, that something had to change, and soon. The whispers in the marketplace, the desperate measures some families took when faced with ruin, began to echo in his mind. He had overheard fragments of conversations, veiled references to young boys, their family's last hope, offered to wealthy patrons. The thought sent a shiver down Lysander's spine, a cold dread that settled in his bones. One evening, as the last rays of sun bled across the Athenian sky, his father called him to the flickering lamplight. The air was thick with unspoken words, a tension that made Lysander's breath catch in his throat. His father's voice, usually gruff but kind, was strained, barely a whisper. He spoke of an offer, a way to save them all, a path that would provide for their survival, but at a cost that Lysander could not yet fully comprehend. The weight of his family's future, their very survival, was suddenly placed upon Lysander's slender shoulders, a burden he was far too young to carry. He felt trapped, caught between the crushing weight of their poverty and an unknown, terrifying future. The hushed conversations between his parents grew louder, more frantic, echoing the rapid thump of Lysander's own heart. He heard his mother's voice, thin and reedy, pleading with his father. There must be another way. Our son. He is but a child. His father's replies were gruff, laden with a despair that Lysander had never heard before. The words themselves were not clear, but the meaning hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of dread. Lysander pressed his ear against the thin wall separating his sleeping mat from their desperate whispers, straining to understand the terrible truth. Then came the name, spoken in a choked whisper by his mother, a name Lysander had only heard mentioned in hushed tones, always with a shiver of fear. Theophanes. Theophanes, the wealthy merchant, known for his vast estates, his fleet of ships, and his peculiar tastes. A chill colder than the Athenian wind snaked through Lysander, settling deep in his bones. He knew Theophanes was one of the men his father owed money to, but the way his name was uttered now, it felt different, more ominous. The next morning, the air in their small home was thick with an unspoken sorrow. His mother moved with a heavy slowness, her eyes red-rimmed. His father sat by the cold hearth, staring into nothingness, his shoulders slumped. Lysander tried to ask, to understand, but the words caught in his throat. He saw the way his parents looked at him, a mixture of profound love and an unbearable grief that mirrored his own burgeoning terror. They were preparing him for something awful, something he instinctively knew would shatter the fragile world he inhabited. Later that day, his father took him aside, his calloused hand resting heavily on Lysander's shoulder. The touch, usually comforting,